Chapter 4. Don't forget to tumble. So I was forced aboard a train and headed for Columbus, Georgia. Fort Benning was no novel to me. I had graduated from the Infantry Officers Candidate School 1 year ago to the very day I arrived back. I scouted around the depot and found a weapons carrier with a paratrooper leaning against it. "How about a ride out to the parachute school, soldier?" "Yes, sir, that's what I'm here for. I reckon you're my only customer." He sounded disconsolate. I wondered if they paid him by the head. After a pleasant trip through familiar territory, he dropped me in front of a group of buildings and said, "You report there, sir." He pointed vaguely at nothing in particular and drove off, which left me with a large kit bag, a larger barracks bag, a blank look, and 3 copies of my orders. Moose had taken pains to give me a generous helping of advice about the school, which was destined to make the struggle easier. I had gotten in good shape on my own time, running around the golf course at Area F for hours on end and doing push-ups until my arms felt like 2 bags full of dead mice. I figured I'd be ready physically. It didn't take much time to find headquarters, and it took even less to find out, "You don't report here, Lieutenant. You report to the Student Training Battalion." A truck went to and from there twice a day. I just missed the first trip, which seemed to mean a long wait. Then someone looked at my orders, saw OSS thereon, and 2 minutes later, I was on my way in a Jeep. The adjutant at the student area greeted me with a cheerful, "Oh, one of the glory, boys," and proceeded to turn me over to the battalion commander personally. The latter decided the safest thing to do was get me off his hands with all possible speed. I tried to tell the man I had 6 weeks, the complete course being 5, but he was in a hurry even if I wasn't. So instead of proceeding leisurely into Class 117, which began training in a couple of days, I was flung into Class 116, which went into action in something less than 2 hours. The brass slammed through the necessary orders, a sergeant went over to supply and drew my equipment, a corporal filled out 90% of the required forms by guess and by God, and I took the physical exam. They should have let me fill out the forms and sent the corporal over to the infirmary, since the exam consisted of me saying, "I think so," when a bemused medic asked me if I was in reasonably good health. It all got done in an unbelievable 45 minutes. Then the battalion commander grabbed my hand, wished me luck, pushed me and my orders and my baggage and my equipment into another Jeep and ordered, "Take the lieutenant to the Alabama area." The parachute school training program was divided into 4 stages, each run by a captain, with a pair of lieutenants and a dozen sergeants to help. The instructors were selected for their overall ability to instruct capably and ride unmercifully. The time-honored punishment for any infraction of the rules, real or imaginary, was 25 push-ups. Military courtesy was faultless, and the student officers were flayed as much, if not more, than the student soldiers. When my section lined up for its first formation, I got an awful shock. The battalion commander, who had rushed me into this particular class, had brushed aside the time-honored alphabetical scheme of things, and I was ensconced at the top of the roll, which meant that whatever Class 116 did in the grim days ahead, Lieutenant Hall Roger W. went first. Our section sergeant knew what I was thinking. "That's right, Lieutenant Hall. You go first all the way through, from now right through the jumps." Of all the lines and roll calls I'd endured in the Army, this was a fine time to grab the front place. A stage started with a roar, supplied by the instructors, and a run supplied by the students. Not a casual trot or a brief sprint, but a long searing shuffle which never seemed to end, and always at attention. I was never able to persuade anyone in authority that the order, "Run at attention," was a masterpiece of ambiguity. When we reached the point where we couldn't breathe anyway, we would be called upon time and again for cadence count. That's when they started to drop. Every time a student keeled over, an assistant instructor would be detailed to stay with him, bring him back to this world, get him back on his feet, and see that he caught up with the class. It might be 3 or 4 hours before he made it, but he made it, and under his own power. Those who lasted through the run could look forward to climbing the 20-foot ropes which seemed to hang from anything which could support the weight of a man. We were supposed to go up quickly, come down slowly, which, with me, it worked the other way around. Then came the Indian clubs, for which the hell with the Indians. They felt light when you picked them up. 5 minutes later, you'd take an oath that Atlas had handed you his burden. Sooner or later, I seldom bothered to wait. You were bound to drop one or both of the clubs, which meant you had to drop down beside them. That part wasn't hard, and do push-ups. I was never able to find out whether or not that part was hard. All the time you were being taunted by an instructor whose clubs bothered him about as much as the weight of his fingernails. His final bit of mockery was the worst. Anyone who wants can throw his clubs at me. I won't duck. We might not have known the difference between can and may, but he couldn't have been safer. The clubs just slipped from our nerveless fingers. I made a concerted effort to scull him every day for a week and never hit anything but the foot of the sufferer next to me. Then there was the sawdust pit, which sounded harmless the first time we heard about it, but after that first time, strong men paled and weak men fainted when the order was given, "To the pit with 'em." We did exercises in the pit for 50 minutes each day, and I saw men try to crawl out when the whistle blew and not be able to drag themselves over the foot-high board at the edge. Then they'd beg for more fortunate comrades. "For God's sake, lift me out of here before the next section starts." The run, the ropes, the clubs, the pit, and similar niceties lasted for 6 days. Those who couldn't make it were weeded out, and if they asked for it, given another chance. If a man thought he could eventually get through a stage, he could keep trying. One lieutenant took 3 shots at it before the resident psychiatrist found out he was a masochist. We went on to B stage rather impressed with our newly found strength, and the instructors were there straightened us out in a matter of minutes. You go through the parachute school in graduated stages, gentlemen. Ostensibly designed to become increasingly difficult. Although this is the second stage, we in charge here like to think it should be the fourth. Shall we begin? He stunned us with the way he handled the spoken word, and he proved every bit as good as his word. We slank back to the barracks at the end of the first day, and I set aside enough money to have my remains shipped home. The pride and joy of B was the tower jump, the tower being 40 feet straight up, with a ladder leading to a platform on top. On the way, you were advised not to look down if you wanted to stay interested in your chosen profession. A cable suspended between 2 telephone poles ran past the platform, and along this cable, which was on a slight incline, ran a wheel pulley from which was hung a parachute harness. The entire setup had all the charm of execution dock. The student climbed up to the platform where an instructor was waiting, put on the harness, and took the exit position. The instructor gave the exit command sequence. When he said go and slapped the student's leg, the student lurched out in what he hoped was a proper exit, fell 25 feet, bounced back up 10 because of the harness and cable combined, and then went whizzing down the cable on the pulley wheel. The ride ended when he slammed into a huge pile of sawdust 30 yards away. My section was the first to make the tower jump, with me taking the first hop. There wasn't much to it other than a terrific psychological build-up. It took a bit of nerve to step off into 40 feet of nothing, but it never bothered anyone after the first time. Actually, bouncing along under the cable was good fun. Some students hesitated. A few refused point blank to jump. They froze in the door, and if the instructor couldn't talk them into going, their airborne days were over. That was the idea behind the tower. It got rid of the ones who could never have taken the first step and spared them the agony of finding it out in a plane. We used to kid a lot about the tower jump, but on the second day we saw a man freeze in that platform door. Nobody laughed. The rest of our mornings in B were spent learning how to handle a chute in the air and how to land. Handling the chute wasn't difficult, and once we'd learned to drive it, it wasn't hard to steer. Learning to drive was something else. We did it in the hard way, in a suspended harness which hung from wooden supports. Hanging there, a total dead weight, was brutally hard on the victim. The apparatus was affectionately known by various vulgar titles. Heart-rending indeed were the screams for mercy when someone got caught between the harness straps and a cast-iron buckle. This invariably reduced the instructors to helpless laughter, but the victim never joined in. Many a man left the suspended harness platform walking like a camel in labor. Learning to land was a riot, nothing less. If A stage was supposed to make us men of iron, B stage seemed dedicated to the premise that iron or no, we'd break if we hit the ground hard enough. We tumbled backwards, forwards, and to both sides. We jumped, fell, dove, and were pushed off platforms ranging from 3 to 15 feet in height. We came down on sawdust, dirt, canvas mats, rocks, and as often as not, each other. Afternoons in B introduced us to the gentle art of parachute packing. It was dull, but we paid close attention. You personally packed each chute you jumped, so everyone was anxious to learn. When we learned, we practiced. The chutes in the packing sheds were silk affairs which had survived 100 jumps and then had been retired to less strenuous activity. Class 116 got through B stage in fairly good shape and wandered over to find out what C held in store. We knew the afternoon meant more chute packing. We soon learned the mornings meant discovering how a jump feels when you begin it halfway down. This trick was made possible by steel towers 250 feet high with 4 arms at the top. They resembled gallows too much to suit my delicate taste, and one of my classmates recalled the tower jump setup, remarked, "Who the hell was the constructing architect for this place? Jack Ketch?" An instructor heard him and bellowed, "What was that about Jack Ketch, Lieutenant?" Then he caught me smiling and thundered, "Lieutenant Hall, who was Jack Ketch? Wasn't he the man who held the torch for Guy Fawkes? Wrong. Give me 25, sir." Then he turned to the other officer and added, "You give me 25 too, sir, for starting this history lesson. Ketch and Fawkes, eh? Before this week's over, we'll have you gentlemen thinking in terms of Burke and Hare." There'd been a grammarian in B, and now we had a historian in C. The operation of the uncontrolled descent towers was fiendishly simple. A student was harnessed into an open parachute. The rest of his section secured the outer edges of the chute to a large iron ring. The ring was then hauled to the top of the tower by steel cable, one of which hung from each arm. The students made the trip up, dangling underneath the chute and ring combination. When he reached the arm, they let him hang there long enough to make his peace with God. Then the chute was released from the ring, and after flapping down 50 feet, things caught hold, and he floated the last 200 in a real live drop. I went first, as always. There was a lively discussion among the instructors about which arm of which tower there were 4 to use. It depended on the wind, the optimistic hope being that the student would be blown away from the structure. If you started to drift toward it, you were expected to climb your risers and slip out of danger. We were earnestly advised to act promptly. The staff finally decided I'd have what they kept calling the best chance. I love that, on Arm 3 of Tower 4. The entire class was assembled around that tower. When I realized I was being used as a demonstrator, I politely suggested one of the hired help might be better qualified. The honor remained mine. They fastened me in the harness. My heavy-handed and light-minded fellow students fumbled around with the parachute and ring until it looked hopelessly entangled. Then the order was given, "Take him up." I went sailing skyward on a ride which was short but interesting. When the ring stopped, I gazed around and saw Fort Benning from a unique angle while I hung there swinging like something on a Christmas tree. A loudspeaker blasted, "Ready, number 3. I checked around to see how number 3 was getting along and found myself quite alone, which seemed to make me number 3. So I answered in a small voice, "Yes." The loudspeaker roared again, "Sound off like a man. Are you ready, number 3? I was in no mood to have some clown standing safe on earth make disparaging remarks about my formal dances. So I roared back, "You mean I have a choice? Certainly I'm ready. Throw the goddamn switch." "A simple yes will suffice, Lieutenant." The ring traveled up 10 more feet. There was a jolt, a drop which I felt but didn't bother to observe, and a soft whoosh as the chute filled out. The voice mournfully assured me I'd be dead the moment I hit the ground if I kept my present position. Then I was turned over to another voice, whose one comment was a cheery, "Feet together or broken ankles. Take your choice, sir." My landing was adequate and little else. I got up and walked away, which was all I asked. After watching my classmates splatter themselves all over the field, I resolved to pay a little closer attention when the instructors talked about how to land. Up until the first free descent, we'd been more interested in getting out of the plane intact. Between the towers in the morning and the packing sheds in the afternoon, C stage week went quickly. Any spare time was devoted to lectures. How to work your reserve chute, a comforting little thing you wore on your chest to make sure the government got a return on the money invested in your training. How to tell high-tension wires from clotheslines, stay clear of anything stretched between poles. How to walk across the top of another jumper's chute in midair and still get down alive. But don't be surprised if he punches you in the mouth when you're both on the ground. In short, all the things a growing boy should know before he makes his first leap from a plane in fright, to quote the number one gag in the parachute school's instructional repertoire of clever sayings. Then Friday afternoon, we arrived at our packing benches and found suspiciously good-looking chutes waiting for us. The chief packer chilled our blood with, "Work carefully, gentlemen. You'll be using them on Monday." Now, the first time we packed chutes, we did it in about an hour. We'd been doing it every day for 2 weeks, and some of us had it down to 20 minutes. That afternoon, not one man left the shed in less than 3 hours. Most of us stayed the full 4, and some wanted to come back and work in the evening. The instructors were quite familiar with such a reaction and would have none of it. They checked the packing process at least 4 times, and once they said the chute was all right, you laced up the cover. Their clincher was, "It's okay, sir. If you won't jump it, I will." No one argued with them past that point. The only thing left to do was worry, and I swore I'd never worry about an inanimate object again the way I worried about the parachutes I packed for my first jump. The churches did a thriving business that Sunday, the fact it was Easter giving the necessary excuse to men who hadn't been for so long they started to applaud when the choir stopped singing, and if the last day was spent in prayer, the last night was spent in retrospection. Life in the barracks wasn't exactly gay. Everyone wrote at least one letter which began, "Tomorrow I make my first jump, and in case something goes wrong, I just want you to know." There was a negligible amount of conversation. One brief sentence per subject seemed to suffice. The usual poker game started and collapsed under the handicap of being unable to produce a dealer who could give 5 cards to each player each time. A few of us decided that our blood spilled on the ground would be no less beneficial to the flowers for having a slight alcoholic content, made a wise move and trotted up to the officers' club. We relaxed under the soothing influence of some good Yankee beer and spent a far happier night than many of our brooding friends. Next morning, breakfast was generally ignored. The company area was strangely quiet, none of the usual huzzaroo. We had acquired the reputation of being a carefree group, plenty of noise and chatter, always singing while we marched. Our repute suffered that day. Class 116 spent its pre-jump hours being about as colorful as a pound of flour. They were waiting for us at the airfield. We went to our lockers with considerable misgivings and took out the chutes we'd labored over 2 days earlier. It was then I realized parachutes could have expressions. The small one looked smug, the big one looked sullen. Our packing instructor came by, wished me luck, and said he wasn't worried. I profanely mentioned wishing I knew how he felt. Then we went out to the dressing benches and wrestled our way into the harness. Loudspeaker kept breaking in with uplifting gems such as, "Put 'em on right and tight, gentlemen. You're liable to go to pieces if you fall out of it 800 feet up. And remember this about your chutes, they're held clean." After we'd waited an eternity or two in the sweat shed, a pep talk was delivered for our edification. It ended with a completely ineffective, "Well, gentlemen, this is it." Some poor soul in the back benches shot his previous night's supper, and a sergeant called the roll. First stick, plane number 1. By now I knew what to expect. I led my stick out to the plane, got a quick but thorough check from an inspection team of instructors, then climbed on into the C-47 after the men got aboard. Our officers went in last and came out first. Things being in order, we took off. My seat was next to the open door, which gave me much too good a view. There wasn't much time to enjoy it, though. Stand up. After 3 weeks, it was a reflex action. Hook up. Fastening my static line to the overhead cable was one part of the ceremony I handled with extreme care. Check your equipment, meaning the equipment on the front of me and the back of the man ahead. There was no one in front of me except a jump master who could afford to grin because he wasn't going anywhere. I counted my chutes and smiled idiotically. Sound off for equipment check. The last man started with a lusty 12, okay, and it came down the line until my 1, okay. So far as we knew, we were ready. Then all eyes fixed on the 2 small lights over the door, one red, the other green. The pilot turned on the red one as we neared the drop zone and switched on the green as we passed over the drop panel. The red light came on. Stand in the door. We started the chain gang lockstep shuffle forward. Since this was an individual exit jump, there was no hurry. Certainly none on my part anyway. I swung into position, and one of the men behind me yelled, "Make it a good one, Lieutenant." I nodded my head with a conviction sadly lacking in my heart. Then came the jump master's "Ready?" The green light flicked on. I felt a slap against my leg and heard "Go." My form was atrocious, about as bad as it could have been considering I hadn't managed to hit the tail of the plane. I was conscious of falling forward but not downward. Then something cracked and I was snapped like a whip. That was my introduction to the dreaded opening shock, and it lived up to advanced billing. When I was able to tilt my head back, I checked my chute, and it did look beautiful. Then I began to think about landing. There were people on the ground watching me, being the first jump of the day, and the inevitable loudspeaker announced, "Bad exit, good recovery, you're okay, number 1. The last 50 feet down, I concentrated on finding a soft spot, but blew that particular landscape survey completely. I hit on the bottom of a swing and got out of it in one piece by managing a sprawling roll, which combined all the best features of sliding into second base and stepping on a landmine. Planes were dropping men all over the zone now. Class 116 was on its way. My plane made it second run, and I watched the kid who'd been sitting next to me drift in for a landing, which wouldn't have broken a soap bubble. We'd been told you could never be sure whether you were going to bounce halfway back up or ease in cotton soft. We bundled our chutes and started over to the trucks. On the way, we passed a medic waving a red flag, the signal for an ambulance. Someone had broken a leg. You never knew. On the second jump, I recovered my lost form. 3 and 4 were stick jumps, crowded but without incident. We gradually got ourselves back to the point where we could pack the chutes in 20 minutes, which is more to the credit of the method used than our courage. We'd come to realize that if we did anything, even approximating the correct procedure, the chute would open unless we screwed up the cover with baling wire. Number 5 was the night jump, our last and qualifying descent. For a change, I jumped leading the last stick. The weather was foul, got worse, and by the time my plane took off, it was rough going around the drop zone. We went on in. There was only one stick left, and the pilot figured we'd have time to make our run. Going into the zone, the plane behaved as a thing possessed. One jump master wanted to send us out. The other thought the weather was too rocky. The pilot chimed in with the news that he'd infinitely prefer to lighten the load. The jump masters were still undecided. One of them asked me, "How about it, Lieutenant?" I'm all for getting the hell out of here. What about the men? They'll follow you. Tell them we'll try it. It was raining hard, and I kept my head inside, out of the sloshing prop blast. The red light came on, then there was a blinding flash of lightning, and I went out minus the green light, without ever hearing "go," or feeling the slap on my leg. I wanted to get out into heaven while the gates were still ajar. Once out of the plane, it was the easiest jump of them all. The lightning obligingly spotted the landing zone for me 2 or 3 times. The atmosphere was heavy because of the rain, and I came down ever so gently. I even managed to hit close to the trucks, with the landing itself being one of those cushion jobs I'd dreamed about. As I was rolling up my chute, all the while muttering hearty self-congratulations, a voice near the trucks called, "Is Lieutenant Hall on the field?" "Right here, Lieutenant Roger Wilcott Hall, United States Parachute Infantry." I felt 9 feet tall. The owner of the voice came sloshing towards me. All I could make out was a trench coat and a helmet liner. "How was the weather up there, Lieutenant?" "Rough, very rough." "Do you think they should have sent you out?" "Those boys knew their business." "How was your jump?" "Frankly, a thing of beauty." "Everybody else all right?" I was in an expansive mood and quite willing to forget past indignities. "Yes, everyone qualified. Your class did a good job." "You bet they did. 116's a fine bunch. Congratulations, Lieutenant Hall." He stuck out his hand, and I shook it. "When you get back to Washington, would you give General Donovan my regards?" "Sure will." I was still too far up in the clouds to use my head. "Regards from whom?" "My name's Gathier. Ridgely Gathier. Good night, Lieutenant Hall." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Good night, sir." Only the commanding general of the parachute school.